Hey all, it's WebCamParrot here, with my in-depth look at Lucifer Morningstar Part 3. In Part 1, we went over Lucifer's earliest appearances chronologically, including his creation, his time spent as King of Hell, and the very beginnings of Lucifer Volume 1. In the Part 2 video, I went over the meat of what happened in Lucifer Volume 1, and in this video we'll be concluding the events of Volume 1, as well as talking about the sorts of things that were happening during Lucifer Volume 2 and Volume 3. Much like the first part, this video is likely to include a lot of speculation on exactly what certain pages mean, which hopefully doesn't bother any of you, as it didn't seem to in the first video either. In the last video, we talked about how Michael discovered that the Presence had abandoned creation when he went up to see him at Primum Mobile at the seat of Seventh Heaven, and in this video we're going to explore exactly what that means for the rest of creation. Firstly, the Presence's absence has left the new cosmic order of creation shook up and fragile, leaving room for other beings to start making changes to it. Two such creatures are the dastardly beings of the Greek mythos, the Hecatoncheires Gyges and Garamas. In this particular scan, I think it's funny that Garamas doesn't even seem to remember who the Presence is, and needs to be reminded by Gyges. Anyway, seeing this as an opportunity, Garamas says they should graft themselves onto some other order in order to survive this new upheaval of cosmic order. Garamas says they should become one of the Endless, and so they approach Morpheus's castle in the Dreaming, claiming to be duplicity and deceit of the Endless. Morpheus is away, however, and Lucian isn't having any of their nonsense, and so he turns them away. It's pretty interesting that Gyges was able to just casually manhandle the guardians of the castle like that, though. Not dismayed by this failure, Garamas decides that they would try something more ambitious, and set about becoming Yahweh himself. We see Lucifer warning some angels of this exact occurrence, but it proves to be too late. After tracing the edges of the space they wish to control, getting a lay of the land, and a general understanding of how creation works, the brothers start utilizing the power of belief by performing miracles in front of humans, including, most notably, crushing an army that would have brought harm to peoples who would one day come to worship Yahweh, and as a result, associating Gyges and Garamas with Yahweh himself. After this, they decide to go and claim Lucifer's gateway in order to travel to heaven, and in return he attempts to destroy them. An interesting side note, Lucifer calls these two the Children of Chaos here, which likely alludes to their ultimate ancestor, the strange godlike origin of the Greek pantheon, Chaos. Lucifer's attack fails to do anything to either of them, as they now hold the power his father once held. Gyges casually backhands Lucifer, and they head through the portal, which, thanks to the Morningstar's quick thinking, instead dumps them in hell. Using his powers, Lucifer resurrects the giant Dedean corpse at Ephrel. As anything he has killed, he can choose to bring back, thanks to his special Lightbringer will powers specifically. They are still getting used to their powers, so Ephrel gives them a hard time, but with their status as God, death can have no hold on them. They eventually defeat the giant demon, but instead of pursuing directly after Lucifer, they decide to come up with a plan. In the meantime, Lucifer has flown to heaven and tries to warn Michael of the impending danger, even going so far as to sit on Primum Mobile and declare himself God to try and get his attention. Garamas has decided to create a shadow double of Lucifer that will negate with him when they meet, annihilating both of them. They end up creating this double from the memories of a human who used to work for Lucifer at his club, the Lux. The other angels offer to help Lucifer against the brothers, but he says that only Michael would have made a difference, and the rest of them are irrelevant. We see Lucifer's death approaching, and the Titans walk up into the Silver City. However, their negation seems to be less than a perfect copy, and as a result fails to annihilate Lucifer in their first clash. The fighting begins, and Lucifer is not only able to avoid their attacks, but injure them too, even causing Gyges to hurt Garamas as well. Of course, they simply heal from all of these wounds, even when Michael arrives to help, as Lucifer is being killed by his double. However, utilizing a spell cast upon the very same human whose memories were used to create the double in the first place, Mazikeen, under Lucifer's direction, was able to strike down the duo before they ever had these newfound powers, using that very same power. A bit of a paradox, but there you have it. As a result, the two brothers were defeated long before they ever claimed the power of the Presence in the first place. During another small storyline, Lucifer locks a bunch of demons inside the human host they are using for their meeting to stop them from causing any trouble during this fragile time. However, the problems seem to be mounting. Lucifer takes some angels in front of his gate, which seems to be fraying and collapsing at the edges. Yahweh's name is written on every atom of creation, and without someone new to shore up the gaps, both the gate, which is held open by his name, and all of creation is beginning to crumble. Lucifer, Elaine, and Michael are brought before each other to a family meeting by Destiny of the Endless. Michael wants to know what happens next in the book, and threatens to take it from Destiny by force, who points out that he and the book have no existence separate from each other, and so he will not do this. Lucifer pushes his luck and tries to tear a page from the book, burning it, only for it to form into ashes foretelling the future anyway. Ashes that read, Fenris and Yggdrasil. I've seen people try and say that this shows that Lucifer isn't bound by the Book of Destiny at this stage in the story, but the whole point of this scene is quite literally showing that even when he tries his best to escape the book, he is still bound by its contents. We cut to a new scene of Fenris of the North myth informing Bergelmir that the end of the world has come, and that as the force of pure destruction, his power is so great that his own strength will naturally turn upon himself without something else to destroy. And so he stored his power and memories in others, his enemies, which he now plans to eat to regain these things. Michael, in an attempt to prolong the end, spreads out his power within the Logos, rewriting God's name on every atom in existence, moment by moment. However, Lucifer realizes that this isn't going to work, as the wolf, Fenris, is coming. We see Fenris again, telling us that nothing can withstand his power, even his own body. In fact, Fenris's destruction of Yahweh's creation is going to be so intense that Lucifer knows his own creation will be caught up in the collateral too, and starts to take a more direct hand in matters. Lucifer destroys the Logos in one shot, which again is the source of the Spectre's power, as I spoke about in the last part, and wakes Michael up as he is going to need his help. Fenrir realizes that the journey to Yggdrasil is arduous and drains you of your life force, and so he plans to use a human as a host to reach it for him. Lucifer is himself worried about this journey, and tries to make it as easy for himself, Michael, and Elaine as possible by approaching it from a certain place, but even so they will be badly affected by this journey. As a result, Fenrir isn't remotely worried by their expected arrival. The three of them end up at the World Tree extremely crippled, with Elaine becoming blind. As a result, Fenrir is able to trick Lucifer into drinking a portion of his essence through the blood of someone else who contains some of Fenrir's power. This corrupts Lucifer, sending him into a blind rage that causes him to start a fight with Michael. The Demiurgos tries to stop him using a hefty amount of his power, but understandably doesn't want to kill his brother, and so Lucifer survives. They clash in a huge explosion that leaves Michael dying on the roots of the Yggdrasil. Lucifer's rage wears off, but it's too late. Michael's death, left unchecked, will overwhelm everything that exists. As a result, it's on Elaine to restrain this power within herself for the sake of creation. However, she can't seem to manage it on her own, and Lucifer has to give his support in order for her to gain full control over it. Lucifer shows Elaine the ropes of creation making, or as this issue was called, the Yahweh dance. It takes her 3 attempts, but eventually she manages it, and now there are 3 creations. Once this is done, Lucifer returns to hell for reasons even he is unaware of. Some random demon seems to think that Lucifer is the first king of hell, even though that position should arguably be held by the first of the fallen. Lucifer again mentions that both his creation and this one will be destroyed if they don't do something about it, and that the only hope is that Primum Mobile is left whole so that it can be used to fix everything should the presence return. This leads to a huge battle for Silver City, and with Lucifer standing in defense of it, the advancing army of the Lilum, who wish to see the presence punished by having his creation destroyed, are briefly too scared to approach it, at least until Fenris just throws a spear straight through Lucifer, immediately incapacitating him. After a long and arduous day of fighting, Fenris finally reaches Primum Mobile, saying that everything that ravels, rapes, or rends is a garment for him to wear, and so turns into a lightning bolt, smashing directly into Primum Mobile. Fortunately for Lucifer and Mazikeen, they are in the womb of creation where Fenrir is at his weakest, with Primum Mobile itself trying to fend him off like an infection. Lucifer and Mazikeen try to stop the wolf from reforming properly, but are ultimately unable to stop it. Fenris starts to put the whoop-ass on Lucifer, badly tossing him around and hurting him badly. But Lucifer has been biding his time for this one moment, saving his power and catching Fenrir off guard, ultimately killing him in one fatal blow. They figure out that in order to save everything, Elaine is going to need to put the other 2 creations inside her own, so that it's her power that can support everything. They have to fly off and grab the edges of her creation and pull them around the others. Lucifer is shown to accelerate much faster than Elaine, despite her huge power in this moment, and they fly across all of creation, even through the place where the afterlives should have been, and other weird stuff. Eventually, they pull the edge around, and Elaine is made god of all 3 creations. Lucifer has decided that he's had enough, however, and gives his Lightbringer powers to Mazikeen before flying out of creation using the rite of passage. Once he's out there, he sees the myriad creations of the Overvoid before being swept up by an island that kind of moves itself around in the Overvoid, which is when he is joined by none other than the Presence himself, who says that he is happy to see Lucifer there outside the plan. As it turns out, this has been one giant experiment by the Presence, who now would like to share memories with Lucifer so they can both be reborn as new beings with an entirely new set of experiences. Lucifer, of course, refuses and flies out into the void beyond, eventually being entirely swallowed up by its immensity, which is where Lucifer Volume 1 ends and Volume 2 begins. Lucifer isn't gone for long before he returns to his club in LA, where it is stated that the entire city is drastically changed on a fundamental level as a result of his arrival. We see Gabriel, one of the 3 original archangels, is being shown something by the Metatron. You see, the Presence has been killed, Gabriel is shocked by this, but is soon convinced to go investigate Lucifer, as he is the most likely culprit of this crime. Where it is then revealed that Lucifer was actually injured out in the overvoid by something, and that it is slowly killing him, which is the only reason he returned at all. Gabriel pulls out a piece of this thing inside of him, and then tells Lucifer that he recognizes it as the same material was sticking out of the corpse of his father. They decide to continue their investigation down in hell, and Lucifer reveals that his attacker was a mirror image of himself. Once there, Lucifer and Gabriel easily take on a group of demons, before eventually being taken before Mazikeen, who is now Queen of Hell. She tells them to visit her mother Lilith, which confuses them as Lilith is dead, but Mazikeen reminds them that she still lives in the minds of men, and so, like many other gods and icons of belief, will still be found within the dreaming. They notably go through the Gates of Horn, a place that leads to the dreams of lies and deception. Once they arrive, Lilith tells them a story of Azazel, an angel who was tasked with eating the sins of humanity. This gradually corrupted him over time, however, and he became more of a risk than anything to the local population. So they went to a local wise woman for aid, and she told them that an immortal can only be killed by an immortal, and given that they knew no other immortals, they would simply have to use a piece of Azazel to kill Azazel. Lucifer is a much more powerful and higher status angel, so this same rule should apply to him too. Anyway, eventually they manipulated Azazel into having 2 sons. They killed one of these, and used his blood to make a sword, which was then used by his brother to kill Azazel. This only causes Natan, Azazel's son, who killed him, to turn into Azazel himself, but the sword is still out there, and seems to be implied here to be responsible for what happened to Lucifer and the Presence. After this, they leave, and Lucifer is faced with a dream of Elaine, which I mention because some people try and say that this is the overvoid for some reason, and that Lucifer was able to crack it. No, this is just an illusion created by the dreaming. It is interesting that Lucifer was able to break out of it so easily though. Despite this, however, the dreaming is still an incredibly difficult place for Lucifer to find his way out of, and he has to use a special back exit he has known about for a while through Izanami's lands. If you remember my previous video, you'll remember that Izanami has a place within her realm that draws upon the minds of dreamers and uses them to fuel her unique method for gathering pain and suffering. From there, they head to Earth, where Azazel is being kept in a jar. Long story, but basically, Dream put him in the jar. Anyway, Azazel gets let out of the jar, and the angel Raphael shows up too. Lucifer just uses this as a way to remove the big metallic shard in his chest, however, which flies out and smacks Azazel clean into non-existence, which also, unfortunately, kills off their current lead on the investigation. Or it would have if Raphael wasn't the angel who buried the original Azazel. They get him to tell them the location of the burial and rush off there, only finding the feather of Metatron. Gabriel gets mad and flies up to heaven to challenge him, and promptly gets smacked and sent flying back all the way back from heaven to the burial place. This is when Lucifer reveals that the killer of the Presence and the being that attacked him out in the void was none other than Gabriel himself. You see, Gabriel is supposed to be a disgraced angel, effectively mortal and human, but keeps surviving things like being thrown bodily all the way from heaven and surviving. That, and a scar on his neck that Lucifer inflicted during their fight in the Overvoid, it's clear that some other force has been manipulating Gabriel and changing his memories to forget that he even did this. You see, it was Metatron who sent Gabriel out there originally. He had heard a voice from the Presence telling him to send Gabriel after Lucifer with the special Azazel sword, but Lucifer survived and the Presence ended up dead instead. The angels look upon the dead body of God again and instead see this weird bulb-like object instead. The Presence is clearly becoming something else. Not long after this, Metatron is also found dead, killed by Raphael of all people. The Yahweh being begins to stir, and it has its effects on the angels, some of them going mad, others crying uncontrollably, so they decide to go investigate it and find it absolutely alive, swelling with the heartbeat of creation, which proves to be an awful idea as this strange pod opens up. All the angels are put into some kind of strange trance, and what was the Presence steps out saying that he is a god of fire and brimstone, and that he means to remake the entire world in his image. You see, when the Presence was struck by Gabriel, he was corrupted by the sword, but gods cannot change slightly or in increments. They change all at once, causing the Presence to burn out like a star and then reignite. The Presence has been seen as a jealous and avenging god, a wrathful god. This is that same god, but come back wrong. Beings begin to lose their free will as it is stripped away from them by their new god. It's worth noting that much like earlier with Lucifer's rule over hell, Izanami's realm seems to exist outside of the Presence's influence, and of course so is Lucifer's creation. This new dark Presence starts by remaking Michael, and it's stated that in his Silver City the angels work like a clockwork automata, perfect synchronicity. Lucifer visits Elaine for help, who returns the powers of the child of the Basanos, as well as the Lightbringer powers that were gifted to Mazikeen at the end of Volume 1. But Elaine herself decides to remain out of the conflict for her own reasons. The Basanos power ends up being split between two people though. Feel like I should mention that here first. They use these powers to manipulate fate and help Lucifer and others in their engagement with the Presence and his new angelic host. The Presence informs Lucifer that he has already absorbed enough of his essence from the piece of him stuck to Gabriel's blade, and Lucifer remarks that he no longer sees the being as his father at all. Lucifer returns to the earth, and there he uses the eye of another demon to scry on this new Presence, trying to find out his plan. Here we see a new Lucifer being created from Lucifer's current son, Takihiko, now granted the Lightbringer powers. But the Morningstar has put his own plans into motion as he now wields the sword that once guarded Eden, a very powerful artifact. In some smaller altercation, Lucifer easily kills a bunch of tiny golems said to be beyond the boundaries of life and death. Eventually, Takihiko, Michael, and Raphael come to confront Lucifer, who then shows the difference between a novice Lightbringer and himself. As it turns out, the Sword of Eden cuts space and time itself, and he uses this to get rid of two of the combatants, including Michael, and kills what seems to be the third, his son, Takihiko, in one shot with his special sword. Lucifer goes to directly challenge this new Presence being himself as he thinks he has discovered its weakness, corruption. Using the heart of the fallen angel Gabriel, and even his own body, he gradually pushes this new Presence to the point where he can simply chop him up with his fancy sword. This won't kill the god, but it sure does seem to mess him up pretty bad. As far as I know, this storyline was intended to have more after this, but the comic never got continued beyond this issue, so for now we'll have to move on to Lucifer Volume 3. As this storyline is currently ongoing, I don't want to spoil too much of it for you guys, and it's likely that anything I said about it would be rendered somewhat irrelevant once new issues of the comic came out. So for now, I'm going to go over things in less detail, and once everything is out, I might decide to do a fourth video covering this in more specifics. The scenes that I have decided to go over are scenes that I think require some speculation or may even be particularly controversial at the moment regarding Lucifer fans, and I wish to elaborate everybody on what I think are more reliable interpretations of the source medium. I'll also go over a few things that show Lucifer has some new abilities that we haven't seen before. The storyline starts with Lucifer making himself immortal using some kind of ritual involving symbols that represent belief in him, like ravens, which are often viewed as the bird of the devil. We also get to see this interesting description that Lucifer has lived 1,000 tales and has been the monster in 1,000 shadows. We also see that he was capable of hiding a location from the presence, not just once with an island, but also Gately House. Now I have to talk about an extremely controversial scan, one I almost didn't want to talk about because it will make people extremely mad, that being this scan right here. Now a lot of people try to use this scan and a Twitter statement to say that this big hand here is the Great Evil Beast, and that because of this, Lucifer is the Great Evil Beast. I find this explanation problematic, and I'm sure most of you that have read this stuff are aware, this interpretation is extremely contradictory, but for those of you that haven't, I will go over why. Firstly, in the original Swamp Thing storyline where the Great Darkness appears, it's explicitly stated that it is no fallen angel, that it is the soul of darkness itself, a complete absence of divine light. A being from before time, the ultimate darkness. So not only is it explicitly not a fallen angel like Lucifer, but it also contradicts exactly how Lucifer describes himself in this very same storyline. Lucifer says that he is a shadow created by the presence to distinct himself against, and that he specifically made Lucifer with some good in him, but because without those elements of each other, perfect light and perfect darkness are one and the same. So the Great Evil Beast is described as the ultimate darkness, and Lucifer explicitly is not the ultimate darkness according to himself. On top of this, the Great Evil Beast is supposed to not only be a threat to the presence, but everything good in existence, including all of heaven, which I'll remind you was a fight that Lucifer already lost during the War in Heaven. Not just this, but recently we've discovered that this was just a tiny fraction of the Great Evil Beast, and that its full power is way beyond this. Additionally, in Sandman, as we saw earlier, Lucifer goes out of his way to distinguish himself from the Great Darkness, literally referring to it as something separate from himself. So taking this position that the Great Evil Beast is Lucifer ultimately corrupts not only Alan Moore's Swamp Thing run, a classic and foundational part of DC today, but also Lucifer's appearance in Sandman and even Lucifer Volume 3. The problems with this interpretation actually go even further, creating inconsistencies in Justice League Dark as well, but you get the idea, this interpretation just doesn't work. So I'm going to present a number of more consistent solutions to this page. Now, as I've spoken about before, I don't use author statements that take place outside of the text. I don't believe in anything outside the text, and I certainly don't take Twitter statements which aren't even vetted and published by DC. There is a whole host of literature by people like Derrida, Hegel, and Roland Barthes that I could call on here to explain why I do this, but it probably requires its own video. The easiest way to put it is that when we are analysing some source material, the ultimate authority is the source material itself, and the interpretations the reader draws from that material. To do anything else is to spit in the face of the analysis to begin with, because that's not what we're trying to do anymore. So the moment you use some sort of outside source, like an author statement, you've corrupted your initial endeavour to analyse the source material. Anyway, with this in mind, we are led to the first solution that the hand depicted here is simply not the great evil beast at all, as it simply cannot be. It is some other manifestation of his being that we have never seen before and don't know about. Because in the actual comic, it's never directly referred to as the great evil beast at all. It's only ever referred to that way in a tweet. Now, I don't find this explanation incredibly satisfying, but it is a superior conclusion than the one before. The second interpretation is that when Lucifer was made imperfect with a hint of darkness to him, as it's explicitly told to us in this same issue, the Presence took that darkness directly from the primordial darkness that would later become the great evil beast. So quite literally, Lucifer has a part of the great evil beast in him, and thanks to the special rules of the Hindu realms, he can access that side of himself when he normally cannot. To add weight to this, Lucifer's son, who longs desperately to step into his angelic heritage, something he has never even been seen before to do, that has never actually existed, is accessible to him in Naraka according to Rama. So exactly the same thing should apply to Lucifer and his greater darkness aspect too. The last explanation is that Lucifer as a being of belief is associated with certain attitudes and ideas that stem from humanity, and as the adversary is often viewed as the ultimate evil despite having nothing to do with mortals sinning at all. A narrative that is pushed extremely hard throughout much of Lucifer's story. So it's possible that what we are being shown here, what they're calling avatars, are different manifestations that reflect a similar belief structure that Lucifer is associated with. We can see this clearly with the horned goat depiction and with the snake. In real Christian mythology, Lucifer or Satan was never directly depicted with goat-like attributes, as demons and things like that were considered insubstantial or more angelic. It wasn't until the Middle Ages, hundreds of years later, when people started creating art that had Satan in it, that we commonly saw these horned or goat-like depictions. So this could be here in Lucifer Volume 3 to represent the change in belief regarding Lucifer at the time that created this vision of the other side of him, despite never actually appearing like that in any comic as far as I know. As for the snake depiction, both the First of the Fallen and Neuron are said to be the snake in the Garden of Eden, and in the case of the First of the Fallen, they even blatantly distinct him from Lucifer in the same explanation where they call him the snake. Neuron's is more implication, but it's still there. So the snake here, just like the big black hand, is symbolic of a role that people believe that Lucifer fills in much the same way that people view the First of the Fallen and Neuron. Honestly, I think that this is closest to what the authors were trying to capture with this scene anyway. All of these interpretations are clearly more consistent than this headstrong kind of gut reaction to just say that Lucifer and the Great Evil Beast are the same. I personally find these explanations to be more well grounded. Of course, the last two can also work together fine too, so take your pick. I think all three explanations are consistent. Lucifer does a couple of other things in this volume, including time manipulation and a pretty casual, massively faster than light feat that involves him flying all the way over to another galaxy to get some wood. And in the process of healing someone else, it's stated that flesh means very little to Lucifer, and that it is easy for him to prepare. Lucifer also appears in an ongoing comic that was only recently released called Hellblazer Rise and Fall. The character in this story is undeniably Lucifer Morningstar, and they go out of the way to tell us this, but the timelines don't match up at all. Lucifer is still king of hell, but he is somehow meeting Constantine now, despite them acting like it was the first time they had ever met in Lucifer Volume 3, long after he abandoned rulership of hell. I've also heard that these Black Label publishings are supposed to be side stories, which would make sense. A combination of these two things, and the fact that the comic is ongoing, makes me want to just leave it for now, and maybe address it and the rest of Volume 3 when they finally come out in their own video. Anyway, there ends what is almost certainly my longest look at any character in DC, and to be honest, a classic and beloved character like Lucifer definitely deserves it. One thing I consistently like about Lucifer is that his solutions to problems are always completely bizarre, different, and exciting. There is this constant anticipation for the next trick that he's going to pull out, and he is this perfect blend of mischievous trickster and overwhelming power. The tones of the story in general harken back to classics like Paradise Lost, but with so much more depth and flavour of character. Lucifer is this really well-defined character with an overwhelming pride at his core that constantly causes and creates conflicts around him. It's a set of comics that I can easily recommend to anyone, particularly if you are interested in something more mature or a bit divergent from the usual superhero fare. Anyway, that's it for this video. I'm planning on doing a video covering the best speed feats in DC, so look forward to that. And of course, I want to go over the First of the Fallen eventually as well. I currently have plans for another video on Hal Jordan Parallax as well. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you all in the next one.